personally, I was amazed that you'd started this in 2015, Rachel, which was just sort of incredibly innovative and visionary at that time. So we are really delighted that Rachel Musson is joining us today for this fourth call. Rachel's the director of ThoughtBox, and Rachel was a secondary school teacher. So I don't know how many other teachers or ex-teachers we've got here, but I know we always have quite a few teachers on these calls. And then went off to research regenerative education and did some traveling, I think. I was pleased to hear you spent so much time in Pokora in Nepal, Rachel, because I went there last year. What a beautiful place.
Oh, we'll compare notes afterwards, definitely.
Yeah. But you used all that knowledge, didn't you, to pour into ThoughtBox, and we are really, really pleased to have you on the call with us today. So, as I said, ThoughtBox have developed this curriculum around climate change. So I know that Rachel is thinking of submitting a response to the DFE call. So that's brilliant. And this curriculum is used by over 5,000 schools already. So fantastic work, Rachel.
Thank you.
And we're going to, Rachel, I think we'll sort of delve into a little bit about how the call will go tonight. It's she's already said it's not going to be a talk at us, which I didn't expect, and that it can be quite interactive. And there's a few of us on the call from the Climate Courage campaign. And yes, must say that delighted that Les Gunby, who has just joined as kind of associate to the campaign, doing some work for us as a community organizer, is here. So great to have Les on the call. Louise is here and Yadja is here. So please, feel free to sort of ask questions about what the campaign is doing as well. But yes, it's going to be pretty interactive, and then there'll be time for questions at the end as well. So I'll hand over to you, Rachel.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Siobhan. We're really lovely to be here. I'm really grateful for that warm introduction. I co-host a podcast with my dear colleague Holly, and we call ourselves Two Inconvenient Women. And I sort of often introduce myself in calls as an inconvenient woman for many reasons, mainly because I tend to bring in the inconvenient conversations that are tricky to have. But in particular, I tend to break the rules a lot. And so I'm going to be a little bit provocative and not really do as I'm told today. Rather than sort of share with you information about the triple wellbeing curriculum, I'd like to just actually spend time experiencing the why and the how together. And then we talk about the what at the end, because I think the practicalities are easy to just look at yourself. But I'd just like to sort of take you through a little journey into triple wellbeing and what it is as an approach, what it is as a mindset, and what it is as a habit that we can all sort of welcome into our contexts, and sort of share the resources as we go. I'm a very interruptible woman, so please do feel free to unmute as we go or pop things in the chat. I'll try and keep an eye, and I know the wonderful colleagues here will sort of share those, and there will be plenty of time for discussion, but we don't need to wait to the end is basically what I'm saying. So I am just going to share some slides with you as we go, and invite you to sort of keep an eye on the chat box. I'd like to sort of have some conversations going in the chat box. Those of you who are new to ThoughtBox or haven't come across our work before, it's all about cultivating connection. And we really focus in this crazy, beautiful world on supporting educators in particular to really address and meet the symptoms and the root causes of our intersectional crisis. We're so aware that within the educational system, we can't ignore the urgency of some of the immediate symptoms, but we also need to really look at where they're all coming from. And so we're trying to meet this space in both places. We're really working with many, many people around the world to support a culture of what we call triple well-being, which we'll dive into today, into our own lives as well as our learning contexts. And we're building a community of practice of educators working together, supporting each other. I always like to use the analogy of swimming upstream and how difficult that is. But actually, when we're a sort of a shoal of salmon, it's a lot easier to push against the tide. And that's part of this community of practice, to bring educators who are prepared to stick their elbows out and go a different way. It's always nice to see Meryl on these calls, because I know she is one such educator who does that so beautifully. But I'd like to begin, if it's not too big a question for a Tuesday evening, to invite you just to share in the chat box, how are you feeling about the world right now? And feel free to just share whatever wants to come out. There is no right and there's no wrong in the emotional landscape. But if you're just happy to share in the chat box, how are you feeling about the world right now? Tuesday, the 5th of November, 2024. Jumpy, that's a really, really significant word, Les, and nervous and scared and concerned. I think there's poignancy in a way of having this call on the day of the presidential election in the US and all that comes with that uncertainty. We feel that as humans are like an alien species on a planet we just arrived at. That's a hugely powerful statement, Greg. Thank you. Louise has just finished bewilderment, with the election coming up, feeling deep, deep sadness. We've got deep concern, mixed feelings. We're safe as a family, but so many things going on: war, floods, the climate crisis. Yeah, disconnected. Thank you, Meryl. One of the women whose work I really admire, Clover Hogan. I don't know if you've come across her. She's a young climate activist. And tired, that's a hugely small but very significant word there. I love Clover Hogan's work, and one of the things that she said in a call we were on a few years ago is she called the current emotional landscape an emotional smoothie. And I always like that as an idea, that actually everything's in there. And in an average day, we can go from feeling really energized and joyful and hopeful, despairing and existential and mournful. And it's all in there. And I think that's important to welcome, that our emotions are fluctuating and that we are full of them. And those of you who are familiar with the work of Joanna Macy and the work that reconnects, we use a lot of her work in our organization. She talks about the 3 stories of our time: the stories of the business as usual, which is sort of stick your fingers in your ears and pretend that none of this is happening; the story of the great unraveling, which is our despairing, apocalyptic story; and the story of the great turning, which is our really hopeful activist story. And we're all in all of those. We dance in all of those stories, and the emotions of those stories are always live with us. And I think one of the most inconvenient truths within the parameters that we sit in, especially in education, is that emotions are not really welcome in the classroom. And I speak from being an English teacher for 15 years of my life, and I had the privilege of welcoming emotions in, because when you teach literature, you're teaching humanity. But for many, many classrooms, emotions are not welcome. And so how do we start to talk about and face up to the enormity of a world in crisis in a landscape that doesn't welcome any emotion, never mind our own as the educator? There's many surveys being done with young people across the world. I'm still using statistics from 3 years ago because I really like these statistics. Well, I don't like them at all, but they're powerful statistics. But I'm aware that there's recent research that's been done. But 2 big surveys done with Save the Children and the Climate Psychology Alliance a couple of years ago found that 70% of young people are worried about the world that they will inherit. 84% are very worried about the impact of climate change. And this third statistic, which might not seem like the most alarming, but it's the one I think that is the most important. 48% of young people who were talked to reported that other people had either ignored or dismissed them when trying to talk about the climate and biodiversity crisis. And firstly, to honour and recognise why that happens. I think for so many people, we're saying to children, don't worry about it, it's okay, you don't need to think about that. And so that dismissing is actually coming through care and compassion. But what is happening with that dismissing is the children are finding themselves utterly alone with nowhere to go to talk, to explore, to express. There are other reasons for dismissing, and we're going to dig into those a little bit as we go. But I think it's important to remember the profound experience of aloneness. And Caroline Hickman, whose work I really have drawn on over the years, told once a story of a 6-year-old, Sophia, who was in her clinic. And this little girl said, look, if you don't tell me the truth about the world, I can't trust you. And if I can't trust you, I won't talk to you about my thoughts and feelings. And if I don't talk to you, I'm all alone with my thoughts and my feelings. Now, I have a little 6-year-old niece, and the thought of her being all alone with big thoughts and feelings about what is going on in the world just makes me want to cry. And so I think there's an invitation into the courage for us to step into difficult, uncomfortable conversations, to just allow them to happen without needing to fix, without needing to have happy endings. It's the process that is important. And that really sits at the heart of our work at ThoughtBox, is entering into processes of connection and care for ourselves, for each other, and for the rest of the natural world. I forgot my trigger warning with that slide, sorry. Let's quickly backtrack. A quick flash of headlines from today. Now, I do these similar talks quite frequently, and I've never found a slide deck I can put together that has a cheery headline. So here's just a little snapshot of some stories from today. And I've deliberately chosen stories about the climate and nature crisis, just things that are happening in our world at the moment. And there's bleakness everywhere you look. Now, I'm deliberately choosing stories from our mainstream news outlets, and I'm deliberately choosing stories from the breaking news. I'm not searching for them, and I'm doing that because this is what we all face every time we turn on the news, turn on the radio, go online to news broadcasts. We're facing flash headlines of crises, and that does something to us. It does something profound to us that is actually perpetuating the crises that we're in. Now, one of the provocative statements I used to make, and it's thankfully no longer being provocative, and I'm so grateful for this cohort and this collective to be really holding space for this. The climate crisis is a mental health crisis as much as anything else. And one of the uncomfortable truths is that we can actually perpetuate the mental health crisis by teaching climate change, or by having narratives about the climate crisis in school that do not process the emotions that we're feeling. Because what can happen is we end up just giving lots of information to give knowledge about the crises without any holding for the enormity of what that means. And that is putting many, many young people into dire distress. It's also terrifically inconvenient, but unbelievably essential to recognize that as an adult, we are not immune from the emotional landscape that we are dancing in. We are not robots, despite what children might like to think. We have our thoughts and our feelings, and we are involved in this process too. And so it's tricky to say that our emotions need to come into the conversations, but it's important that we are processing our emotions in these conversations. And I really want to spend a little bit of time unpicking why just talking, is one of the most powerful things we can do to shift away from the enormity of the anxiety that we might be holding into a space of connection and empowerment. I'm not a science teacher, I'm an English teacher, so I'm going to just do the next little bit with all my nerves on, because I'm going to talk about the nervous system in a slightly scientific way. And so forgive me, because I've done it in a really simple way. But I want to just do a little bit of a science lesson about what's going on in all of us, young and old, no matter where we are in the world, underneath the surface because it's incredibly important to the reality of the world that we're in. Now, there's a lot going on in the world which is having a continual impact on our nervous system. And we all have this beautiful inbuilt nervous system that kicks in whenever threats arrive and that kicks out when that threat has gone. And as we've evolved as humans, this nervous system has been there to keep us safe. So when something stressful comes, like the saber-toothed tiger wandering across the plains, our parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, gets us ready to fight, flight, freeze. You know, it raises our heart rate, it decreases our digestion, it decreases our production of new cells, it gets our body ready to fight. And when that threat has gone, the parasympathetic comes in and puts us into a soothed state, into this calm state, this regulated state. We start to breathe more slowly, our digestion returns, our heart rate goes down, and we're allowing ourselves to go into that calm state. But what is happening in the world that we live in is that the stresses are not going away. They're actually building. And so we're not getting to do the breathing out. Oh, phew, thank goodness that's over. We're just getting more and more and more and more stress. And so our nervous systems are not actually up to date with the world that we're in. We're still using the old system from, you know, early humans inside us. And the reason I'm going off on a random tangent about this is it's having a massive impact on how we respond to the world. Now, if you've not come across the polyvagal theory or the vagus nerve before, I highly recommend you go and geek out on it because it's extraordinarily fascinating. What I love about this nerve, and it's our longest nerve in the body, it's called the wanderer. It looks like a tree, and I just absolutely adore trees. So that's one of my favorite things. But the significant thing about this nerve is it touches through most of our internal organs, meaning that when it's triggered and activated, it's actually impacting all of our body. It's impacting our skin, our digestion, our heart rate, our sexual reproduction, our capacity to emotionally regulate. It's connecting to most things. So our nervous system is actually impacting how we show up in the world. Now, a really quick lesson on the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system through the vagus nerve. As we said, the nervous system is designed to keep us safe, but our current world is not compatible with our old-fashioned nervous system. And what we find is that we can go into 3 different states of regulation. We've got the ventral vagal state, which is when we're feeling safe, calm, connected, engaged with the world. And that is when we're feeling grounded and at ease. We're maybe social, we're relaxed. We have then this shift into a sympathetic state when stresses come our way, where we feel we're in danger and our nervous system is kicked in, and that makes us perhaps anxious or agitated or a little frantic. And if we're not able to get out of that state, we can go into an even deeper state of anxiety and overwhelm, which is called the dorsal vagal state, which is literally, I cannot cope. I need to spend the day under the duvet, watch a lot of Netflix and eat lots of ice cream. And I'm going to pretend that the world out there doesn't exist. And this is a numb state. It's an overwhelmed state of feeling alone. Now, when I go into schools and we run these trainings, we ask people to stand in a room depending on where they feel. And we often get a lot of people standing in the numb corner. And it's important to recognize that actually what's happening there is that's our body saying, you know what? We can't look at this right now. We're just going to zone out. And it's actually a really beautiful self-care mechanism. But the flip side of that is that as we're numbing out and checking out, we're ignoring the state of the world. Things are not changing just because we're not looking. And so the invitation, both in the work we're doing through our triple wellbeing programs and an invitation to all of us in this world, is to almost partner with our nervous systems to allow ourselves to co-regulate and self-regulate to get us back into that ventral vagal state. Now, the thing I absolutely love about the vagus nerve and how we can get ourselves into this calm state is that all the things to do are free, easy, and joyful. And when you've got those as like the things to do, that's a pretty good checklist. So if we want to be really helping ourselves, helping children, helping our communities to get ourselves emotionally regulated and strong and empowered and resilient and resourced, here's a little checklist of things that we can do. One of the most powerful things we can do is talk. Because when we're talking and connecting with another person, our nervous systems are actually co-regulating and co-syncing with each other. And we're sort of soothing simply through the act of talking. Being in nature is one of the most beautiful things to calm our nervous system. So it's a win-win. We're outside, we're connecting, we're caring, we're resourcing. I'm a big fan of cold water swims and cold water showers, simply from the experience of what it does to my nervous system. It sounds horrific, but once you get over the first few goes, it's joyful, and it really helps to regulate that into that sort of ventral vagal state. Breathing, mindful breathing, is a hugely simple, powerful practice that we can do at any point. Singing and humming. I'm in a choir. I cannot recommend choirs enough. Singing with other people is a huge regulation for your nervous system. And hugging, or just having touch, whether that's with an animal, with a friend, with partners, this human connection, all of these put our nervous systems into this state of calm. Now, this matters because what is happening is as the crises around us are growing, we're seeing increasing levels of mental ill health because we are unable to cope. And of course, we're unable to cope. There's existential crises going on. We're not designed to cope with this sort of world. And so it is important to both be empathic to anyone around us who is checking out, but also to be supportive, to help to bring them up into a more regulated state if we can, and if that is welcome. I'd like to, oh, I forgot laughing. Sorry, it was the sneaky little bullet point that's just floated in. One of the things that someone said to me recently, because they've been listening to the podcast I do with my colleague Holly, they say that you two laugh a lot, considering that you're talking about the climate crisis. And I was like, we're not doing that out of flippancy. We're doing that out of resourcing. The joyfulness is actually a hugely powerful form of activism, because that joy and that laughter allows me to get out of bed every morning and face the world. So yeah, let's not be afraid of playing and laughing. But I want to we're going to go into a breakout room in a second and just do a little activity, but I want to just think for a moment, coming back to the theme of trees, that our nervous systems, in particular our vagus nerves, respond to the world around us. They're very attuned to respond to the messages around us, and they give us and they receive these messages of safety or threat. And so if we're around a sort of calm, soothing person, our nervous system actually automatically soothes and calms just because of how that other person is. And one of the big pieces of work we're doing with schools is really supporting teachers to care for themselves as a form of activism. Because if they're having a calm attitude and a calm presence in a classroom, they are having a hugely powerful effect on the emotional regulation of the children in that room without even saying a word. And so one of the forms of co-regulation is just talking and connecting with another person. And so I'm going to invite us in a second to go into a breakout room with one other person. And we're going to be in there for about 10 minutes. And I'm going to give you some instructions whilst we're in there. But we're going to do a practice. And at ThoughtBox, we've created these practice cards, these triple wellbeing activities, which are sort of very short 5 to 10 minute activities to strengthen our connection with ourselves, with each other, and with nature. And this activity is an active listening activity. And you may have done something like this before. It sounds very simple, but it's actually a really hard thing to do. You're going to have a partner and you're going to take it in turns to speak for 3 minutes and answer a question. And so one of you will speak and one of you will listen. And the question is, it's double-barreled, if that's the right phrase. The question is, what breaks your heart and what gives you hope about the world? What breaks your heart and what gives you hope about the world? I really invite you to make sure you get onto the second part of that question, because it is important. And the person who is speaking is just going to speak for 3 minutes. You might find that you've got loads to say. You might suddenly think, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm saying. But I promise you something will come out. The role of the partner is to simply listen And this is the hard bit. I'm going to invite you to not do anything other than listen, not interrupt, not interject, not make lovely sounds, to just listen. Because when you just listen, you're holding space for another person to unfold. And after those 3 minutes, I will put a little message in the chat box to tell you that the 3 minutes are up. You're just going to thank each other for speaking and listening. And the listener will just quickly summarize what they've heard, very, very quickly, what you've just heard your partner share. And the speaker can say, yeah, that was about right. Or if you felt you haven't quite been heard properly, you can say, you know, I didn't really mean that. What I meant was. And then I'm going to tell you to swap over, and the speaker becomes the listener becomes the speaker for another 3 minutes of sharing what breaks your heart, what gives you hope. And then we'll stop, and then we'll reflect back what has been heard. That's a lot of instruction. I'm going to pop it into the chat box as we go in, but the first instruction really is when you get into your breakout room, the person with the longest hair is going to speak first. And your question is, what breaks your heart and what gives you hope about the world? And the listener will simply listen. So I'll give you sort of a little bit of time to say hello, and then I'll let you know the 3 minutes will start, and I'll let you know when they're up, and I'll keep putting some instructions in the chat box. So I'm going to just stop sharing and just look at you all and see if that makes sense. And please do tell me if it doesn't. And I'm hoping we've got some breakout rooms set up. Brilliant. So we'll go into the breakout rooms. I'll put information in the chat, and we'll see you back here in 10 minutes, but I will give you timed instructions as we go. Thanks, everybody. Hi, everybody. Thank you. I'm just going to look at all of you for a moment, if that's okay. And I just wondered if anyone wanted to share either out loud or in the chat box. How was that? How was that to be listened to? Or
April's just put in the chat that she was on her own, that she didn't have anyone to connect with.
oh my goodness, April. I'm so sorry. What happened?
I think what happened is that the person in her breakout room didn't show up or maybe left just before. So that's
April, I'm so sorry, because all of us were in a breakout room, so there was nobody. Actually, that's for us to think about it. So none of us were in the main room to know that. I'm so sorry. So actually you have the opposite feeling from what we were hoping to inspire. So I'm deeply sorry for that. But I'm really grateful for you sharing that feeling of disconnection, which is probably doubly potent in this moment. But anyone that did have a conversation, Meryl, yes.
I'm always happy talking. I had Siobhan and it was lovely. I listened to Siobhan, and I'm a talker. I'm normally just in there saying everything, you know, not listening necessarily. I'm not very good at listening. But Siobhan, I listened to her very much for 3 minutes, and it came across as, you know, she was talking about the fact that we have repeated problems, that we don't seem to be learning, that there's conflict, there's inequalities. And it was, what was surprising to me is where she was coming from was very much the human side. You know, I'm much more about earth and nature and everything. And you know, Siobhan was talking about people, and it was lovely to listen to. And right towards the end, when she was talking about the hope that she gets from the world, it was very much something that I'm aligned to as well. When we're protesting, when we're marching in the street, when you're feeling like there's lots and lots of people around you doing the same thing, calling for change, because change is something very difficult for humans. We make the same repeated patterns of mistakes all of the time, and actually driving change to a better place is incredibly difficult. But we are not alone. And so no, it was a lovely chat with Siobhan. I've never spoken to her. I can't believe it. We were in the same room not that long ago, and then suddenly we're here in online instead.
Thank you, Meryl, for sharing. Anyone else want to share how it was? Maybe how it was just to speak for 3 minutes, or how it was to listen for 3 minutes. How was that experience? Les, yeah.
I'm sort of linking back to April's point again. I mean, I would have quite liked to just been on my own for a few minutes. I don't think we're on our own enough sometimes. I find I'm very self-conscious sometimes in those kind of situations, but when you get into the flow and sort of allow the thoughts to come and somebody is listening, you know, it is very cathartic, and then when that person feeds back to you and you feel heard and understood, yeah, there's something very powerful about it.
Thank you, Les. Carolyn.
I enjoyed listening to Louise. We're at different stages in our parenthood. And so it was nice listening to her and hear her talk about her hopes and worries as a young mom. And it's interesting from thinking as an older mom of older children to hear what she had to say. I thought it was really interesting to hear. Because you tend to surround yourself with people that are kind of in your same age group. And so to hear that perspective was really nice.
Thank you. Hopefully, if you all followed the instructions, none of you did anything about your partner's heartbreak. You didn't try and fix it. You didn't troubleshoot. You didn't problem solve. You just heard it. And I don't want to just assume, but I know this is not the case for April, but I would like to hope that for most of us, we feel a little bit better having just shared our heartbreak. And we do this exercise a lot in ThoughtBox, and we do it normally always by putting two total strangers in a room who don't have anything about each other other than their name. And time after time after time, we have that same experience, and we feel cathartic, as you just said, Les, because another human being is also holding space for us to feel in this way without judgment. And often we find that we have those same feelings. It's just validating our emotional experience. And the reason I think that this activity and this exercise is so powerful is it took 6 minutes. And it didn't require us to have any knowledge about anything. Any knowledge about the climate and nature crisis, any knowledge about that person, any knowledge about psychology, about mental health, nothing. All we had to do was be human together. And the reason I think this is such a powerful activity is that we can do this all the time with anybody at any point. Now, I used to do this a lot, not with these questions, mind, but I used to do this a lot when I was teaching in my classes and invite children at the beginning of each lesson just to have a check-in with the person sitting next to them. And it was normally, how are you doing? But it was active listening. And what we're doing in these moments of connection is we're co-regulating, we're empathizing, we're listening, we're sharing, and we're getting it out. So whatever that emotion is, it's coming out, and just getting it out and being heard is really important. So just to kind of hark back to the classroom space, and I'm just going to own my timing is awful. I'm supposed to have finished right now. I'm only halfway through. So we're going to just keep this interactive space of stopping and talking as we go rather than talk at the end, if that feels okay. I'm going to do that anyway, even if it doesn't feel okay. So apologies. But we're just going to kind of look again a little bit at the complexities of talking about these big issues in the classroom. And perhaps if you're just happy to pop in the chat box, thoughts on this question. What is it that stops us from talking about big, complex existential crises, especially with children, especially with young people, whether that's in school, whether that's with our children? What is it that stops us? And you might want to answer from a personal perspective, you might want to answer just from what you think or what you know about why we don't have these conversations, because unfortunately we don't. And there are many, many, many valid reasons why we don't. So if you could just pop some thoughts in the chat box about what it is that stops. Really pleased you brought that one in, Les, not having the solutions. Us humans are solutionary thinkers, especially teachers. We want to fix things. We want to know the answer. And therefore, because we can't know the answer to the climate and nature crisis, or to many of the crises we're in, we often feel it's better to not even start the conversation. This idea, Carolyn, yes, of feeling the need to protect. And that is a hugely powerful empathic response. And again, very nurturing. We don't want to overburden children with needing to look at or think about some of the big things going on. We have got, like with adults, a brick wall makes me feel worse. With kids, the complexity makes it hard to give a rounded picture. So both sides, Louise, I'm feeling that pain there of actually just adults not wanting to talk and children not knowing how to talk with them. Gosh, that's a really powerful thing. The idea it requires us to stop and stand back and look at it. And that in itself is enormous. This fear, Siobhan, of coping with their feelings. And I think for many teachers, there's a fear, there's a panic that comes with emotions, that we suddenly have to fix them or do something with them that we're not qualified to do. And again, I just want to not belittle the importance of having a very, very careful space for supporting mental and emotional ill health, but also to just take away the fear of needing to fix children in this context, because actually we're causing more damage by not opening a space to be processing and talking. This idea that the future is really dark in many ways, and children will see up to 4 degrees of warming. We have no real idea how bad it gets. And so again, it's being able to look at the enormity of what we know is coming, as well as what we don't know is coming, and try and imagine how to even help children to respond to that. This fear of opening thinking that comes back when they don't have someone to talk to. Yes, again, April, like when the conversation finishes with us, where do they go? And again, it's always really important to think about the what next, the next step, the safe place, where can you continue with these conversations, and having that as a clearly given message. Really hear this one, Kieran, that we fear that we're not trained or competent to lead these conversations. And especially as teachers, you know, as a breed, we are told that we have to qualify and become a practitioner in something that we're expert in. And then suddenly we're supposed to be expert in global collapse. We're not. So therefore we don't want to go there because that's not our job. And yet it is our role. Thank you, Greg. You've been an open person. So I've been I can't see because the emojis in the way, a too open person. So sometimes the idea of sharing perhaps too much and maybe not meeting people where they're at or where their nervous system is able to meet. Really hear this, April, causing a loss of hope, especially in teens. Just coming back to those 3 stories of our time, the Joanna Macy stories, it's very easy to tip into the story of what's called the Great Unraveling, which is the apocalyptic story. Because if you just turn the news on, you just get story after story after story of apocalypse. And we're really, really good at making apocalyptic movies. So you can go into Netflix and watch the end of the world in whatever manner you want. And I'm saying this with sort of tongue in cheek. We tell ourselves too much the stories of collapse. We don't tell ourselves the stories of change, the stories of what if. And that is part of the problem. But also part of a solution, because we can turn to these stories. Huge fear of triggering more depression and mental health crisis, suicide in children if we go into these dark spaces. The fear of parents, that's a lot of backlash that schools have of what parents might think. Fear of becoming overwhelmed ourselves. Again, our emotions come into this space. Contradicting parents who may also be in denial. We could, you know, do this for the next half an hour. It'd be a little bit miserable, but there's many, many, many reasons why we're not talking. And yet, not talking is actually perpetuating the crises that we're in. And I just want to keep reminding us of what that little activity was that we just did. That was talking. And it made us feel better. And it helped, and it resourced us, and it put our nervous system on a higher level of resourcing. It didn't need to do any of those things that we're scared of. And it was permission to just go there. One of the best teaching techniques I ever learned was from Mr. Kavanagh. And he showed me what to do to get over the fear of a kid in a class saying something incredibly offensive or challenging or uncomfortable or inappropriate, like the teacher's worst nightmare when a kid opens their mouth and says something and you then have to deal with it because everybody's heard. And we might feel that in these conversations, there's such cans of worms that we're opening. We don't know what's coming, and therefore it's quite terrifying. And what Mr. Kavanagh taught me, and I'm going to pick on Carolyn, I hope you don't mind. I'm not going to make you do anything. I'm just going to use you as an example. Let's imagine here that Carolyn's in my class or in my house, whatever it might be, and she's just said something really inappropriate, because of course she would do that. And my first reaction might be, because I've just, it's been said out loud in front of all the students, I might say, Carolyn, what you've just said there is incredibly inappropriate. It's very offensive. You must not say that. And I'm pointing at her. And what everybody is doing in the class is looking at Carolyn, and your choice now is to argue back and defend whatever it is that you've said as strongly as you can, or shrink back in mortal shame because I've just made everybody in the class look at you and basically called you wrong, or silently plot your revenge against me for shaming you in front of all your peers. But either way, it's lose, lose, lose for you. And the message of that conversation is that Carolyn is bad. Don't ever say anything in Mrs. class because she'll make you feel awful. So let's rewind and imagine she's still just said something highly inappropriate or offensive or controversial out loud. And what I do is I pull with my fingers in the air towards the person who's just said it, and I pull away. So I reach towards them, I pull away with my fingers, and then I point at my fingers and I say, okay, what Carolyn, sorry, no, I don't say that. I say, what has just been said there can be quite offensive, or it can be quite challenging, or it can actually be a really inappropriate thing to say. Why might that be inappropriate, or why might that be a challenging thing to say? And what I'm doing is I'm pointing to my fingers, which are holding the imaginary statement that has been shared. And I'm inviting all of us to question why that statement might be inappropriate or challenging or need unpicking. I'm not mentioning Carolyn's name. I'm not pointing anything anywhere to do with her. So we're all actually objectively thinking, why might that be interesting to question? As well as you, as well as Carolyn, thinking, maybe I didn't mean that, or maybe that's something my parents say that I've never thought through. And it's a hugely powerful tool to allow critical thought and to allow us to not let something go that needs examining. And I will just share, I use this technique in a slightly alternative way with my brother-in-law, or with like people around, dinner tables who are maybe saying things that it's just, you can't say that. And instead I use this phrase of, hey, I wonder why. I wonder why, a statement like that can actually make a lot of people really angry, or I wonder why something like that is actually probably quite, politically, red flag. It's just an inquiry as opposed to an accusation. And again, it allows whoever's brought that thought to soften and to think beyond it. So it's another tool for us to feel more resourced going into spaces of discomfort, because these are uncomfortable conversations. So thinking about our role, whether that's as an educator, as a parent, as an adult, these are tips to speak to anybody, not just children. Let's just create the space and time, going for a walk, having a quick chat at the beginning of a meeting. It doesn't need to be long, and it can be done in a bit of an artificial way, maybe using some active listening if it feels a bit weird to just say, hey, how are you feeling about the existential crisis of the world this morning? You might want to do it in a little bit more kind of careful way, but let's make this space. Let's welcome the thoughts and feelings without needing to fix them, because we just give them a space to be heard without needing to become a therapist. Let's feel comfortable not having the answers. And actually the other top tip as a teacher was to say, when someone asked me a question and I didn't know the answer, rather than kind of quietly Google and pretend I was, I knew it and I was sort of looking it up as I was speaking, to say, you know what, I don't know, but let's find out together. And actually allow our not knowing to be part of the process of connection, and that we can explore, what do we do about this? Oh, I don't know, but I bet there's people out there that are on it, because believe me, whatever crisis we're facing, there is somebody out there working on it. And it's hugely empowering when we start to help children to connect to the helpers. I'm just having a flashback of a quote from Fred Rogers, who said when he was a little boy, his mum, and scary things happen on the news, his mum would say to him, look for the helpers. There are always people who are helping. And I think that mindset is incredibly important in this space. Whatever children bring to us, whatever questions or anxieties or concerns, let's also find the helpers, because there are people working in an alternative space. And really, this final part I want to sort of move into before we finish is to create spaces for connection. So when we look at the state of the world, and we stand back a little bit and start to think about all the things that are going on, we can start to see that we're really out of balance. As a species, as human beings, we're built for connection, because connection helps us to feel safe and part of the world. And if we have a quick zoom out at some of the headlines just today, we can see headlines. I've put them in 3 categories for a reason. Headlines showing how disconnected we are from the natural world, headlines showing how disconnected we've become from each other, and headlines showing how disconnected we've become from ourselves. And what we see in our news stories is symptoms of a world in crisis, symptoms of an unhealthy world. If we were to sort of, as an alien, look in on humans and planet Earth, we're really not well. We're not well in all these different levels. And just to sort of move us towards the end before we sort of chat together, when we start to look at the bigger picture, we can see growing levels of personal ill health. There are escalating, rising levels of physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional illness in countries and cultures right across the world. But let's just keep remembering these are symptoms. These are symptoms of a world in crisis. We can see right across the world growing levels of social ill health, with inequality, fragmentation, othering growing in our communities. And we can see increasing levels of environmental ill health, with ever increasing climate and biodiversity crises right across the board. So the diagnosis is that the symptoms are telling us that we're not well on a personal level, we're not well on a societal level, and we're not well on an ecological level. You may have come across these 2 phrases before. I found them when I first came across this. It was like the most relieving thing, which is a weird thing to say. So when we look at the state of the world, we can term everything that's going on as the polycrisis. And the idea of a polycrisis is multiple overwhelming crises. Intersectional, yes, but overwhelming. Everywhere you look, there's a crisis. Another framing is to call it or understand it as the meta-crises. And the meta-crises recognizes that there's something underpinning all of the different crises that we're facing. And all of the depth research that we've done at ThoughtBox, and we have a free publication of our research that I can share in the chat later, that you can download for free. All of our research connects with all the research that's been going on from practitioners right across the world for 50, 60, 70 years, which says the underlying crisis is a crisis of connection. And what has happened as we've evolved as a species is we've disconnected from ourselves, disconnected from each other, and disconnected from the rest of nature, to the point where we exploit, extract, pollute, kill, maim, harm ourselves, others, and the more than human world. And for me, this was a really significant moment of recognizing, oh my goodness, if there's one problem, there's a connection problem. I can do something about that, because a disconnection problem has an opposite, which is a reconnection solution. And it just allowed a sense of huge activism and huge easing in holding the enormity of all the crises, bringing it right down to one crisis, a connection crisis. And so really the work we're doing at ThoughtBox, the work that so many people in so many organizations and so many places are doing, is to help us to reconnect with ourselves, reconnect with others, and reconnect with nature. Because when we find ourselves connecting, we're naturally supporting wellness. We're naturally creating spaces for a healthier us, a healthier community, and a healthier planet. And it's generative. The more we connect, the more we care, the more we feel well, the more we do well, it ripples out. So finding ways to connect with ourselves, to be strengthening our own well-being through acts of self-care. And that's the first thread of triple well-being, self-care. Finding ways to connect with each other and strengthen our social well-being through acts of people care, of supporting and caring for our families, for our friends, for our communities, for our wider us, our larger us. And finding places and spaces to connect with the rest of the natural world, to strengthen this sense of environmental well-being through earth care, through actively caring for the wider natural world. Now, what I love about my job and what I love about this work is it's hugely active, it's hugely generative, and it's infectious. And I think care is one of those words that's been given a really bad press. It's been made to feel like a wifty wafty kind of pathetic something, whereas care is an active verb with its sleeves rolled up and its hands ready to get dirty. Care is very, very active, empowering, and impactful, because every act of care that we take and every act of care that we make is shifting a culture, shifting a mindset, and shifting ourselves. There is a quote, which I'm hoping I've got here. Yes, I use it way too much, from Adrienne Marie Brown, who says that you're always practicing something. So you're either practicing upholding the world as it is, or you're practicing shifting into the world as you want it to be. And one of the biggest pieces of work that we're doing at ThoughtBox is to really encourage us all to be practicing care for ourselves, care for each other, and care for the planet. Because by doing that, we're shifting our own lives towards a healthier space, and we're shifting the lives of those around us towards a healthier context. So just to finish, just very quickly sharing the resources that we have, which are available to be doing all the things we've just done. And in particular, taking them into schools. So we have a triple wellbeing curriculum that's taken goodness knows how many years to make, which is available for ages 5 up to 18. It's all inquiry-based, discussion-based, relational, and basically looks at the big issues happening in the world through the eyes of understanding, immersing, exploring, and empowering. So we gently move through. We use a huge amount of guidance from the Climate Psychology Alliance and climate psychologists to make this age appropriate and emotionally safe. And it's all been written with non-experts in mind. So you do not need to know anything about refugees if you go into the refugee topic. You learn with the students. Many of these topics are free, and some of them are behind a very small paywall, but there's a QR code there for access, and I can show these later. The second thing to share is our triple wellbeing cards. These are just daily activities. And the idea of these is to encourage habit change, little ways to start bringing acts of self-care, people care, and earth care into our lives, into our work context. And the more we do them, the more they just become a habit, the more they become part of how we show up, so that we're actually creating change with how we are. And the third one to share is we run regular courses to go much deeper into this as a framework, as an approach. I know, Carolyn, you've been to one of our courses recently, and Les, you've been to a couple. These are just places you can come and dive deeper and connect with other people. We have bursaries up to 100% for all the courses as well, so cost never needs to get in the way. And oh, that's the end. Really, the invitation, I think, in this work is to start where we're at, with compassion for ourselves, recognizing that our own activism is responded to by the emotional capacity that we have in that moment. And that is also impacted by the state of our nervous system, by the state of what's happening in the world. There are some days we are out there fighting. There are some days we are under the duvet munching, and that's okay. But just recognizing that there are things that we can do and things that others can do with us to shift that space and that place. That was a lot more talking from me than I wanted to do. Apologies, I've got overexcited. But perhaps we just have a little bit of time now, because we're a small group. We can just stay in the room. If anyone has any provocations, any thoughts, any reflections, but as well, your own experiences, your own practices, I'd really welcome. This is a very much a community of practice to learn from and with each other. So yeah, let's see what might want to be shared.
Rachel, just to jump in at this stage, and I suppose on behalf of the Climate Majority Project, just to thank you so much for coming and really outlining your approach, which for me, I'm sure I speak for a lot of other people here tonight, is that your approach is so, I feel really quite deeply soothed. And it's because you're not, I feel, coming at this from a let's fix the problem mental health way, which honestly, as a psychologist, a lot of what we do is trying to put a band-aid on the deep disconnection harms that we're experiencing. And I really appreciate this route cause approach that you bring. And actually, if anything, you refer to yourself as inconvenient woman, and I'd like to offer up a reframe. It's not your approach or you that is inconvenient, but the way in which our Western society has just kind of got out of hand and has completely disconnected from how we are meant to be, really, you know. So yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. I love the this fingers thing, externalizing the tricky conversation in that way. I think that's incredibly powerful, especially given, you know, what we're all anxious about tonight in terms of the way we're so divided. I had a conversation just this minute, I won't name names, but just the conversations about how even amongst our friendship groups, it can be so difficult to meet in that middle ground of understanding and have difficult conversations. So that's something I'm definitely going to be using. And also I really, the active listening, that's just really powerful. And I think, again, it speaks to the need for us all as a society to be stepping up in this way. It's not just down to the therapists to be fixing the problem. This is something we can all be doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So much resonates, Louise, and thank you for mirroring back. And actually something you said there about the inconvenience, it's so pertinent because it's, the structures that we're in are the inconvenience. And when we say, I'm not sure this is making us well, that shouldn't be inconvenient. And I heard something on a podcast the other day, and this woman said, I just want to live in a world that doesn't make me ill. Is that so much to ask? I was like, yes, right now it is, it seems. And isn't that absurd that actually to want to live in a world that doesn't make us ill is the most inconvenient thing we could possibly want? Thank you. Just to share, oh gosh, I love that you shared Catherine Burke's book. It's right by my toes here. It's a really beautiful book. We're like groupies. About nature connection exercises within the classroom. Meryl, do you want to speak on that one a little bit?
Just a quick one. I'm doing something with UCL and Catherine. We're having an online session on the 21st of November, I think it is, the day before the curriculum review is due in. So I'll be talking to Catherine about her book and about how it can help young people and teachers connect with nature and earthwards, which is beautiful.
I love this, and it's a really accessible book, isn't it? Very, very helpful.
And actually, I haven't even read it in much detail. I've just been asked to do a review on it, and I think I better reread it now because I really just went through. It's got lesson ideas. It's got suggested questions. It's just a really it's a teacher's handbook more than anything. So yeah, I definitely loved it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Meryl. And just while we're on a quick plug, there's a free version of this book that I've written called The Story of Triple Wellbeing. And this is hopefully an accessible story of how we got so disconnected to the point where we live in a world that makes us ill. And so really did go right back to sort of human evolution, but it's also been written from the point of view of an education system. So how do we transform our education system to put wellbeing for people and planet back at the heart? And there's a huge amount of research and also a huge amount of sharing of people and practices out there doing something to shift the education system. So there's a free download link for that one in the chat. Les,
Yeah, I mean, it's a question for you, Rachel, but for everybody on the call, really. Now I'm thinking about that idea of community of practice because, the way that you've looked at things is, as Louise says, is really inspiring, but everybody's got their own thing to bring to the table. I suppose it's how do we see that community of practice developing or joining up with other similar communities of practice? What's your experience? What is it that other people think would help?
I'll just share really quickly, and then I want to really give space for everybody else to share. But just in terms of how we've got a community of practice going, we have an online community. We're quite a global organization, so there's a place there and a space for people to come together and share and learn. But we've also just recently started a triple wellbeing fellowship, and within that fellowship we've got educators from right across the global landscape and the educational landscape who are just bringing triple wellbeing into their lives and learning context to basically disrupt the system, and at all different levels. Some people just working in their classroom, some people working within a Ministry of Education, some people working at a head teacher level, at all levels, and we're just sharing the learning. And I think the thing that's so powerful about triple wellbeing, we haven't come up with this. Yes, we've made it into a nice framework and given it that title, but this is ancient wisdom about how to live healthily on planet Earth. We've just now helping get it out in more accessible package. So the community practice that we're part of is, as you said, Louise, we're not trying to fix the world, we're trying to change the culture, and it's just an easeful space rather than a combative space, but it's also generative by learning from and with each other. There's no right way to do this because the only way is the way that we can do this. But I'm interested for Les's question to sort of span out for all of us, really. Or other thoughts and questions to come in as well. Louise, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I'm quite impressed with the 5,000 schools that you've achieved, really. And given that what you're offering is a sort of worldview shift, almost, it's not just to have a little lesson add on. How did you go about persuading the schools to adopt this or try this, or like how?
But for many years, that's a really good question. For many years, we were like a Trojan horse, and the curriculum was mapped to PSHE and this thing called SMSC. Do you know if you remember that one? It was a magical thing that came into the education system about 10 years ago that I thought, hallelujah, this is it. It was spiritual, moral, social, and cultural learning. And I thought, gosh, they're going to bring that in and radically transform the education system. No, they brought it in on a Tuesday for 10 minutes. And then, a few years later, it was gone. But what we did for many, many years is map the curriculum to national curriculum learning objectives that had to be done anyway. So it just gave teachers permission to use it and funding to use it. What happened, though, about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, was we realized that we were getting constrained by that, and the work that needed to be happening was not ever going to fit into what the national curriculum told us to do. So there were so many things that weren't covered in the ThoughtBox curriculum, so that we ended up having to stop putting all that time and energy into just that, and we've just expanded beyond it. But it is how many teachers still now get to use us, because it does cover about 70 to 80% of the PSHE curriculum. But because it's a relational process curriculum, it can also be used, some schools use it as drop-down days, because you've got learning about, let's say, the climate and nature crisis for every school-age child that lasts about 6 hours. So you can use it as project-based learning. And because a lot of it is free, that's how we've got into a large number of schools. But yeah, deception probably is how we did it.
I don't know if that's deceptive. It's more like meeting the systems where they're at.
Yes.
And trying.
Yeah. I think that's it. Because, having been a teacher, and most of the team were teachers, it's so useful because you just know what can and can't work.
Yeah.
And it's never the fault of the teacher, it's always the fault of the system. So how can we kind of bend that and allow that space to happen?
Thank you.
Rachel, this is Carolyn. One of the interesting pieces for me, we've been kind of exploring from a kind of educational policy, head of schools perspective here in the United States. And one of the things that I found fascinating about the triple well-being for me is that we've been talking a lot about well-being and overall mental health. But we hadn't really looked at it. We had looked at it from a self-care. we had looked at it a little around community care, but we didn't look at it from earth care. And to your point, what you had mentioned before, I do a lot of focus groups with high school seniors, people that are leaving. And we were finding that what they're most excited and most worried about, which was interesting about doing the exercise, is that they're worried about very big adult issues that I remember graduating high school. I didn't even have a plan and I was psyched. I didn't have any idea what I was doing, but the idea of graduating and having the freedom to do whatever I wanted and explore things and blah, blah, blah. Kids, we've been doing some work with Gallup here. And Gallup, we've been finding that kids are not excited just by nature of graduating high school. That 98% of our kids know they're graduating on time, and about 50% of them are excited about their future. But yet we've been hyper-focused on physical and mental health, and not even, I would argue, not even so much about community health. It's been very kind of individualized, hyper-focused on individuals and taking care of yourself and doing self-care and doing, and I think it goes to your point, which has been interesting for me to kind of examine this in the idea of that we have a community crisis or a connection crisis, which, you know, if you think about what we've been so overly focused on for us in education about young people's mental health, it's been all on how can students take care of themselves? How can they take care of their physical and mental health? Who do they go to access for that? Do we bring in more mental health counselors to help with the issue? And they're not looking at the correlation between what's going on in terms of climate to overall well-being for kids.
It's such a powerful point, Carolyn, and it's really resonating. It's making me think of this article I read a while ago, and there's a reason I'm reaching over here. And it was a clinical psychologist, and she was saying, you know, if your pot plant is unhealthy, you don't say to the pot plant, right, you know, we're going to take some, you know, some drugs and perk up and crack on with, you know, doing better. You recognize that the conditions are not conducive for that pot plant to thrive. And so you change the conditions. You don't blame the pot plant. But what's happened in our cultural narrative around well-being is that we're putting all the onus on the person to do better, despite the fact that the conditions all around them are not going to allow them to do any better. And so coming back to the idea of the triple well-being, this idea, it's culture change that we need, not fixing the bits. But we also can't stop fixing the bits whilst we're getting culture change. We've got to do the symptoms and the root cause at the same time. And then when we start to think about culture change, thank you, April. I'm still feeling this tremendous guilt, April. So, oh, she's gone. Oh, bless her. When we think about culture change, that can suddenly be like, oh my God, I've got to change the entire human culture. No, we can change the culture of our marriage, or we can change the culture of our classroom, or we can change the culture of our own daily patterns. We don't have to take on everything. And there's something hugely empowering when we recognize that actually just starting where we're at is changing that culture, and that culture changing is going to change the cultures of others around. So again, that notion of shift. And I'm going to just end on a Ken Robinson quote that I also overquote, the late great Ken Robinson, who said that successful schools don't focus on output, they focus on culture, just like regenerative farmers focus on the health of the soil, because if you get the culture right, everything else takes care of itself. And I think that is this work. If we allow ourselves to feel well and the people around us to feel well, we are naturally generating a healthier culture and a culture shift. So I really appreciate that, Carolyn, that understanding why we put our attention of well-being on people first, but actually this need to widen it out. Mindful of time, we've got 3 minutes. Anything else? I'm seeing cake. Where's cake? Oh, you've just put, so go eat the cake and watch the cake, Meryl. That's the best thing to finish today. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rachel. Well, I think if there are no more burning questions, I'm just trying to have a look. yeah, just all that remains is to thank you again for that talk. As has been said, I personally feel nourished. And it goes to show how much can be achieved in that short space of time, whether it's the call tonight or just that 6-minute segment of the active listening. Really powerful stuff. Yeah, I'm thinking about the context we're in. I have a goldfish analogy, which is the same thing. It's all about the context and whether it's soil or water or air, what are we literally physically connected to? That's what it boils down to at the end of the day. Okay, yeah, so thank you everyone else for coming, and I am tasked with reminding us all of the next resource call that Climate Majority Project are hosting. For one, I've really loved diving deep into all the different resources that we've just listed on the website or we've been talking about. It's really great to actually explore these spaces in more detail. So I'm looking forward to the next one. It's going to be with Cities Rise on the 3rd of December. Is that right? Yeah, 3rd of December at 6:30 again. And I'll put a link. Oh, well done, Yaja. There's a link to sign up there, and there's more detail there as well. Thank you,
Wonderful.
Rachel.
Thank you all. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
wonderful evening.
Everybody.
Lovely rest of the evening.
Take care.
Day.
Have a good evening.
See you all soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.